Raise some
Cane. You gotta raise some cane. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some cane, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change, the time is now. We gotta raise some cane.
Welcome to the Raising Cane Show. I'm your host, Nate Kane. And tonight we're tackling a topic that is crucial to the security of our nation: cybersecurity threats against our national critical infrastructure. This isn't just an abstract issue. These are real risks to the systems that keep our country running, from the power grids that light up our homes to the water systems that keep us safe, and even our election systems that form the backbone of our republic. These vital sectors are under constant threat from malicious actors, both foreign and domestic. The U.S. government has taken steps to address these dangers, including the National Security Memorandum on Critical Infrastructure, Security, and Resilience. The memorandum highlights the key roles of Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, in coordinating national efforts to protect these critical systems. The focus is on risk management and cross-sector collaboration, but the cyber threat landscape is evolving faster than ever, and the dangers we face are becoming increasingly sophisticated. Earlier this year, the 2023 National Cybersecurity Strategy was released. It aims to shift the balance of responsibility for cybersecurity and realign incentives to encourage stronger security practices. But the strategy also highlights a major issue. Many of the systems that underpin our critical infrastructure, especially operational technology, or what's called OT, like power grids, water supplies, were not built with modern cyber threats in mind. This vulnerability makes them prime targets for attack, and the current security measures simply aren't sufficient to meet today's challenges. One of the most concerning areas is the healthcare sector, which many now see as part of our national critical infrastructure. As we saw with recent ransomware attacks on hospitals, an assault on healthcare systems can disrupt life-saving treatments and put countless lives at risk. It's time to treat cybersecurity and healthcare as a national security priority, and that requires a far more robust, coordinated effort than we're really currently seeing. And let's not overlook the security of our election systems. The integrity of our elections is central to our republic, and any vulnerabilities in election technology pose a serious national security risk. If we can't trust our electoral processes, the very foundations of our republic are at stake. The strategy also underscores the international nature of these threats, making it clear that global cooperation is essential in countering foreign cyber interference. As someone with 27 years of experience in cybersecurity, I can tell you that the urgency of this issue cannot be overstated. The general sentiment across platforms like X shows widespread concern about the gaps in our current cybersecurity efforts. Poor coordination, inadequate training, and a lack of resources are leaving critical infrastructure exposed to attacks. While federal initiatives and grants help, they only scratch the surface. What's really needed is a complete overhaul in how we think about and protect these systems. Tonight, I'm joined by a special guest to dig deeper into this issue, Sam Bushman. Sam is a nationally syndicated talk radio host with nearly 25 years of experience on Liberty Roundtable. He's also a founder of End-to-End Technologies, an IT consulting business. With his expertise in both radio and technology, Sam brings a unique perspective to the table. Together, we're going to explore these vulnerabilities in our infrastructure and what could be done to secure our republic from these escalating cybersecurity threats. Sam, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, sir. I look forward to raising Cain, brother.
Definitely. So, it's a little bit of a wordy introduction, but I really wanted to, kind of break down, what we're going to get in tonight. And it's a deep discussion, a deep dive. There's probably no way we can cover every topic that, covers our national critical infrastructure. But
I think you nailed it, though. I think you really got it spot on. And most importantly, you didn't leave out things that most people leave out. There's only one thing I can think of that wasn't mentioned that I think is worthy of mentioning before we get started. It's very simple, and that is a willingness to do something about it. It's one thing to say we need an overhaul, and I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
But I would also say, though, that as far as I can see, everywhere I look, from general government all the way down to your local dog catcher, I don't see a willingness, Nate. And that, to me, is the biggest problem of them all. You'll never get it done if they don't have a willingness. It seems like they feel like because it's technical, because it's over their heads, they just feel like if they ignore it, it'll go away. And it couldn't be further from the truth.
Well, I was thinking it's the problem is that the United States, we're really kind of the first country to really break, and break into the IT world, the internet, of everything. I mean, that really, it kind of got started here. And the problem is that the infrastructure that everything rides on, that everything depends on, was built really prior to a lot of the cyber threats that we see today. And where I really
in the beginning, it was kind of built on a trusted model. In fact, it was built on the opposite idea that, you know what, we're all kind of in the military, or we're all kind of at universities, and we're all kind of friends, and all we want to do is share information. And so it was built with this trust factor innate or embedded in everything that was done, instead of building it from the ground up with the opposite approach, saying, hey, everybody around me is a potential enemy. We've kind of had this attitude that everybody's a friendly. And so it's built with the opposite intentions in mind of what is needed now.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too, that just kind of laying the groundwork for how did we get to where we're at today? Because I'll tell you folks, things are jacked up. I mean, most Americans have no idea just how vulnerable we are. But one of my jobs was working as part of a cyber protection team with Marine Forces Cyber Command. I was on a team that was basically loaned out to NSA and on what was called National Mission. Our job was to go after hackers hacking our national critical infrastructure. And I will tell you, the things that I became aware of as a result of that job and the intelligence that I had access to, it was the kind of things that would not allow you to sleep comfortably at night. And we really are, and that was a few years back. It's even worse now, because that was really before, I think, ransomware had kind of taken off. And now we're seeing a whole nother category of threats, with ransomware attacks.
The only thing I would say, Nate, is I agree with you 1,000%. What the only surprise to me to date on this topic is that it hasn't happened worse yet, if that makes any sense. Like, how have we gone so far, so long without a major catastrophe? I mean, we've had a few days down times that we can point to kind of maybe alert the public to the realities of this. But the only thing that surprises me is how haven't we had it way worse? Like, I don't get how we haven't really.
Well, I think the focus has been primarily a lot of these ransomware attacks with organized crime and things like that. I think most nation states that could probably do a lot of damage, the only reason that we haven't seen total takedowns of our power grid and of our water supply and food and energy and everything else,
sure,
is because we're not in a kinetic war yet. But my fear is that if we end up in a kinetic war, and World War III,
and I hate to say this, it's not if, really, it's when and how
exactly.
bad. Right?
I think that they are basically holding back because they don't want us to know what they know. The
Yeah,
moment
they don't want a soft assert, and then we basically try to build defenses against it. They want to just bide their time and watch for those windows, right?
That's right. And so a lot of what I did in my job was obfuscating myself, going into the network, and of course, I was trained by NSA, and they taught us how to build our own sockets and connections, and be able to hop around from system to system, take over processes, all of that. And the first step, and it's not like the movie, so maybe that's a good place to start, is what does it even look like? Because most people, they get their ideas from the movies if they're not in this industry. And the movies, you see somebody tapping away on a keyboard and they go, oh, I'm in. And that is not how it works. Very rarely is there a hack that you get in within seconds. Usually somebody is deploying a scanner to look for vulnerabilities, and then they take advantage of those vulnerabilities. And it's basically like you're knocking on a bunch of doors until one finally opens. And the disadvantage to those that are defending against that is the person who's knocking can knock all day long for days, maybe even months. And so a lot of times it's surveillance that's being done to look for those vulnerabilities, probes that are probing our weaknesses. And I'll tell you, I see a lot of the things going on right now look very much like that's exactly what they're doing and have been doing for the last few years, is basically identifying all of our weaknesses, probing us, cataloging where they can, take advantage of us. They're basically building a playbook for the next, generation warfare.
I think you're right about that. In fact, General Flynn talks about 5th generation warfare, and some of this technical cyber stuff is part of that discussion. I also want to mention, when we talk about the movies, they tap on the keyboard for 2 seconds and then they're like, we're in. I want to explain this too. You're not just in, okay? It's layered. You might be into something or into partially able to do certain things, but rarely are you just in. Okay. You might have some capabilities that you didn't have a minute ago. And so this layered eventuality is that you eventually can gain ground, but it doesn't happen all at once either. So oftentimes what they'll do is they'll plant a back door or plant a way in, or they'll be in and they'll do nothing so that you don't know they're in because nothing's happening. Right. Then they'll wait. Right. Then they'll take another layer down, or, invade another layer, and then they'll wait and do nothing. And if you don't, have anything that can raise hackles or make it known to you, they'll just wait, and then they'll attack another layer. And so this is very nuanced as it happens. And if we're wise, and if we have the right logs and the right technology to keep track of this, we can know. But most of the hacks that I've seen that are real, even with the Pentagon and everything else, hey, it took them months to years to get in, and it happened layer by layer by layer. And if you study how they got in, then you see those layers and that happening along the way. That's really important for people to understand.
Right. I'm going to lay out a scenario that I've seen. I'm going to replace the names of the organizations and the players involved, but I saw a scenario, let's say within a decade ago, where a nation state hacked into one of our major agencies. They were able to get access to data and start stealing data, exfiltrating data out of those servers a little at a time. And because it was being done at a certain time where there was already high traffic, nobody noticed. This went on for months. And when they finally realized that something was going on, they, of course, locked everything down, and they got, they got what they thought had cleaned up everything. But what they didn't know was, like you said, they had built back doors back in. And so what they were doing essentially was gathering information for a much, much bigger attack that came at a later date. And when this bigger attack came in, they basically utilized those back doors to get back in when nobody was looking, because now they thought it was secure. And they were able to use what they call lateral movement to move across the network to get into other sections of the network that had more sensitive information. And they began.
And if you know how to watch that lateral movement, you might stop them. But otherwise, they can disappear laterally as well. And you think, oh, I got them out. No, you didn't.
Yeah. And so the other thing too is in this scenario, there were 2 nation states involved. So there was one nation state that was involved in basically laying the groundwork for a very sophisticated spear phishing campaign. Okay. And spear phishing is basically somebody sends emails and that it's a targeted audience that they're looking for. It might be maybe they're looking for command, staff or whatever, people that are in positions of power that they want to, send emails to them. They click on something. These emails are very sophisticated, look like they're legit. And they click on something. Next thing you know, something's being introduced. So this is part of the problem with the way that American infrastructure was built. Was we had what they called the castle doctrine, in terms of defense. We built great walls and barriers around our networks with firewalls and with penetration, devices that would detect attempts at penetration, penetrating our networks. We even built some very sophisticated, advanced systems that would turn on certain security features and all of that.
For simplicity, it would be a watchdog idea.
That's right. That's right.
We're gonna monitor. We're gonna keep track of what we would call choke points, and we will watch these choke points and know if something happens. There's flaws in that, but that was the attempt, right?
Yeah, and
I'm simplifying it intentionally.
Yeah, and I'm trying to as well. I'm trying not to use the all the technical terms that we use in our industry, but basically, what ended up occurring was they very quickly found that it was much easier to get them to come, basically to get for our enemy to get us to come to them, and all they needed was one weak link. All they needed was one person within the network to click on a link to go to a web page, and because they have access going out, they could build a way back into the network from that one connection. It'd be like somebody opening the door. Here's a good way. Let's say that you had a castle with a wall built all the way around it, but that wall had windows. Had windows that you might want to.
Well, to help you look out, right? They have a good reason there, Nate.
That's right. They might want to open that window, let some fresh air in or something. And the problem is in doing so, they of course allowed an entry point for the enemy, and that is what has happened. I think in our country, we have built this infrastructure with a model in mind, but the model has completely shifted. It's completely changed, and most attacks are user originated attacks, meaning somebody inside the network goes out, clicks on something, downloads something, and it creates a pathway in. And so there's no defending against that, except there are some tools that you can use, but I'm not going to get too much into that tonight because it's very complicated. But the real
suffice it to say, the people are the weak link here. They can be some of your greatest assets for security if they know what they're doing, what to do and not to do. They're your weakest assets if they don't, because every time something really like this happens, it really amounts to a human somehow, whether they're pretexted, whether they do something stupid on their own. Either way, it's 9 times out of 10, that's the weak link, right?
Yeah. The other thing that has happened that has also been a real problem is, and this is what this article, or I should say the monologue that I was kind of talking about at the beginning, as I mentioned, OT, operational technology. We have focused heavily on information technology, IT, and not really focused on industrial control systems or SCADA. And there's a lot of components to our infrastructure. It might be a module that monitors. I'll give you a couple examples. In the water treatment plant, it might be a module or a sensor that detects the levels of chemicals. And if somebody could hack into that sensor and modify it so that the chemicals don't balance properly and you end up with very toxic water that could kill people. Or
so let's be clear. It's one for detection of the chemicals to make sure that the balance is right, but also it's then to blend the chemicals to make sure that it continues to stay right. It's both sides at the same time. And if you can get in and monitor that, you could, one, play games with the monitoring to where it didn't realize when it was out of balance. That's a simple idea. The next step is to say, let's make sure we manipulate the mix, right?
That's right. This was kind of, also something that was done. And I'll refrain from getting too much into the details, but there was a country with nuclear reactors that had a bug that was taken advantage of, and this was a SCADA system, a industrial control system that would manage. It would basically manage the reactor rods. So the rods got to come in and out of the basically the cooling pools, and it had very, very minute changes that it would make so that those reactor rods would get damaged. And
that's what happened over time, right?
That's right. Yep, it would happen over time, and it was intermittent.
That's why I brought up this in the beginning about time, folks. This doesn't happen just like boom. That's not how it happens. It happens over time, and you don't know what's happening until oftentimes it's too late.
Yeah. And so these are the kinds of things that are much harder to detect. There's a lot less people who have expertise in defending against those types of attacks, let alone securing them. And in many cases, these systems were built before they were ever connected to the internet. So security wasn't even a thought, because basically you had no way of getting connected to the internet from the system. You had to have somebody come in and literally plug in a device, a console, to be able to even access it. There was no remote access, but then later it became a convenience to add remote access, and the security measures were not in place.
In other words, the hardware that's old school was designed on 100% trust as opposed to zero trust.
That's right. So, so that's what we're talking about tonight, folks. When I say national critical infrastructure, I want to just give you some ideas of what that is. It's the energy sector. That's things like power grids, oil pipelines.
And we do want to add, when we say national, we want to say national and regional. And the reason I say that is because the electric grid really is regional, even though it's national. I mean, you've got the West grid and the East grid, and then you've got the Texas kind of independent thing in the middle, and it all works as one national grid, but it's regional too now. And you take down a region and you can cause havoc with just one region too.
That's right. You also have healthcare and public health sector. There's been ransomware attacks that have gone on against hospitals. And I don't think we ever really saw that as national critical infrastructure. But now what we found out is that they can cripple medical devices. They can delay surgeries. They can even put lives at risk. And last year, for example, there were several healthcare systems that were hit, showcasing just how vulnerable our healthcare infrastructure is to cyber intrusions. You've got water and wastewater systems. A cyber attack targets a local water treatment plant, altering chemical levels like we were talking about earlier, or risking contaminations. I'll give you another scenario. Again, I've got to leave out some of the details of locations and stuff, but there was one instance where you had a commercial, it was a commercial, is in the agriculture industry, where basically you have water systems that are providing water to the fields. And because there's all kinds of runoff from those fields, including contaminants that are found in the fertilizer, they required these check valves, to be put in so that the water doesn't get back into the drinking water system. And somebody was able to get around those systems and basically open them up so that the water got contaminated that people were drinking. That's another example.
This is hard to explain for several reasons, folks. One is to put it on the kitchen table and use language that everybody understands. Another reason oftentimes is you don't want to give away dates, locations, names, if you've had access to some of those. There's NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, that are at stake oftentimes. And so when we talk about this, we don't slow down and hesitate because we don't know what we want to say. We want to make sure we say it in a way that we don't go to jail. Okay.
That's right.
That's really what we're talking about here. I just want people to understand that.
Yeah. And so these scenarios I'm talking about, these are not hypothetical. I'll give you one that I can talk about. Was in Florida in 2021, hackers tried to poison the water supply by manipulating a plant's control systems. Okay. And that's a well-documented case. There's also transportation systems. A cyber attack could ground flights, could disrupt transit systems across the U.S. There's been attacks on transportation hubs, including airports and railways. And, recently, and we don't know for certain because I'm sure they're keeping this out of the news and out of the public, but a couple of years ago, I was involved in doing a lot of research into cyber threats against our shipping industry. And a lot of these ships, when they get inside the harbor, a lot of their control systems, their OT systems, steering, throttle, all of that are controlled, with these OT systems.
Yeah, and that's what makes you wonder when that bridge went down, right?
That's right.
People, just beware. Just kind of connect those dots. Keep going, sir.
I watched an interview that was or not an interview, it was a presentation that was given. This was at I don't think it was a Black Hat event, but it was another one of these other hacking events. And they demoed, they basically built a model of a ship. And they had all the same IT systems on it so that they could demonstrate hacking into the ship. And they did something as simple as through the satellite, which are notoriously vulnerable because people don't tend to upgrade hardware. A lot of times to fix a security flaw, you actually have to do what's called a firmware upgrade. And most people don't feel comfortable doing it. It's not an easy thing that you can just automatically do.
The other thing people don't do oftentimes is they don't change things from the defaults when they install them.
That's right. And in this case, these hackers were able to hack in through the satellite system. They were able to use lateral movement to get to a system that had some, cross touching of the OT system that was able to get to it through the IT system. And they were able to take control of the ballast system in a ship. Now, ballast basically lets in seawater and ejects seawater out of the ship to raise it up out of the water or sink it down, depending on, how much stuff it's carrying and all of that. And there's all kinds of reasons why you adjust the ballast on a ship. But they basically...
it's all based on formulas that the computer should know.
That's right.
Should, because that can be tampered with.
And that's exactly what they did. And they basically got the ship to ingest water on one side of the ship and inject water out of the ballast on the other side.
Ooh.
And it caused the ship to list and basically lean over until it, completely turned upside down in the water. So
this stuff's real, people.
Yep.
Now, when you listen to us, at some point, you're going to go to yourself, you know what? We're just doomed and there's nothing we can do about it. And I want to say that might be true on a national or an international scale. It might even be true at a state level. But there's things that you can do individually. There's things that you can do to influence those who have a stake in this. And like we mentioned at the start of the program, it's really important to understand it's the willingness we've got to focus on the most. The willingness for a politician to say, you know what? I'm in over my head and I need people around me who do know. That's really important. And I think you can get there. We're starting to get there with sheriffs. They're admitting we don't know enough about election fraud, but we can surround ourselves with IT people and OT people that can answer some of these questions about some of these concerns. And if you surround yourself with the right people, pretty soon unknowable things become knowable, Nate.
That's right. That's right. The communication sector is another one. That is a part of our national critical infrastructure. Hackers will target telecommunications networks, disrupting the internet, phone, emergency services. An attack like that could leave citizens and first responders cut off during a national emergency. Last year, cyber attacks on telecoms showed how vulnerable this sector is. And, it's not just it's not just foreign state actors or organized crime either. Sometimes it can be something as simple as a flaw in a software update, as we saw with the recent CrowdStrike incident, which basically took down, basically the whole world.
And they claim it was a flaw, and it might have been, but I have a problem with the whole explanation. Because even if it was a flaw, you know what? Experts like us, you don't roll it out to that many high-level infrastructure-based systems at the same time as they did. You know what?
Yeah.
You roll it out to a small segment. You test it. You make sure.
That's right.
All I'm telling you is that all the controls that are just commonly in place, and even in simple IT, weren't in place for this stuff, and it just makes no sense. So I'm not buying what we're told about it, but your point's well taken.
Yeah, and I agree with you. In fact, I posted on X right after that, and in fact, it's funny thing is I had the most impressions from that post than any other post I've ever posted, and it was basically calling out CrowdStrike and saying that their claims that this is not a cyber incident are flat out lie. That no one releases software without going through pre-production testing, and you test against every every operating system that is out on the market. You do all kinds of stuff because something like this could destroy your company. And so
even if you're doing airlines, you would do one airline at a time, for instance, or you would do, there's ways to mitigate this. But if they really did it by mistake, if they really didn't, put the normal protocols and checks and balances in place, they should never be allowed to continue in the business. It's that severe.
Yeah, it is. Another area is the financial services sector. Now, here's a scenario. Cyber attacks on banks and financial institutions could freeze access to money, disrupt transactions, cause widespread economic panic. Hackers have already targeted banks with denial of service, distributed denial of service attacks to shut down websites and block customer access to accounts. I want people to think about this scenario. Imagine you go into a store and you don't have cash on you and you want to buy some groceries, but their payment system is down. So you go over to the bank and you try to go and pull money out of the ATM, but you can't get anything out of there because they've attacked, the bank's system for being able to pull money out of an ATM. You could have massive panic because how would you be able to buy anything? If you had,
and let's be clear, so people know, even if they hacked something at the bank that didn't relate to the teller machine, oftentimes when these hacks happen, then IT people go in and turn everything else off to make sure the hack doesn't spread. So it might even be your friendlies that are doing the damage that affects you, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. You also have the food and agriculture sector. Hackers infiltrated the systems controlling, there's been several cases of where you've had hackers infiltrating systems controlling America's food production, halting processing plants, causing food shortages. The JBS ransomware attack in 2021 showed how vulnerable this sector is when hackers shut down meat production temporarily. You've got, do you guys remember, I think it was 2 years ago, there was a fire that broke out at a dairy farm in Texas, I believe it was, and 1,300 head of cattle were burned. Basically, the whole building burned down, and along with all their cattle. I was very curious about this attack because I had saw some things in it that looked familiar. So I did a little bit of personal research into it, and I found an expose about this farm that they had automated the entire farm the year prior. And there was a big old expose about them, and they showed all their systems, including the names and the brands and all of that, and the model numbers of, you could see it right there in the pictures in the article. And they had a machine that would go behind these dairy cows and would pick up their poop, and then it was, dumping it into a machine that was creating electricity based off of methane. Needless to say, there's really, we don't know how this fire started, but it could very well have been done through somebody hacking into these robots and causing a fire to, break out inside this. They generated their own power with methane. But this farm, it was more than just cattle. They produced chocolate milk, cheese, and other dairy-based products. It was a manufacturing plant as well as a dairy farm. And I've got serious concerns about that as well. The defense industrial base is a huge area where we've had tons and tons of cyber espionage against defense contractors. Our enemies have learned that the government systems themselves are heavily protected because they're willing to spend the money to protect those systems. But a lot of times the defense contractor systems who, may be doing work on behalf of the government, they're developing plans, they've got, stuff on their computers, they're a lot less protected. And so the defense industrial base has been really under attack for some time now. And in fact, DCSA, Defense Counterintelligence Security Agency, who does all of the approvals for classified information for contractors and for government contractors, they had to create a whole agency to deal with this issue. And so now they're trying to shore up that area, but it's still a real problem. And Chinese hackers have long targeted the U.S. defense sector, and those risks, continue to grow.
Chinese and the Russians have too now. The Russians have killer programmers, my friend. And so the Russians are just as, I know a lot of people today want to believe that the Russians are our friends, and to some degree they're backing Christianity and good on them for it. But in the deep state scenario, and the espionage reality, internationally speaking, hey, the Russians aren't far behind anybody.
That's true. And same with Iran. The same is true of Syria. There are a number of countries that have quite advanced, that are seriously considered our enemies, that have, they're adversarial towards us, and they have pretty advanced technology and training. And I heard there was some cyber activity that was going on against Israel when Hamas attacked Israel. Their camera systems got shut down around their perimeter wall. And a lot of people were breaking into conspiracy theory to think that, the Israelis allowed this attack to happen. I'm not so sure. I think that it's very, because people were saying, well, the Hamas, the Palestinians, they're not sophisticated enough to pull off a hack like that.
Don't fool yourself.
Yeah. And the fact is that when you have a country that is in an adversarial position to another country, but they're outgunned, they're going to ramp up other things that they can take advantage of. And one of those areas is cyber warfare. And so
because it doesn't take much to level the playing field with a few very smart people.
That's right. And when you have Iran as your sponsor, I guarantee you cyber attacks probably came from Iran involved in that. And the problem with cyber warfare attacks is that despite what people would have you believe about being able to identify who did this sort of attack, who was the one who launched it, it's extremely difficult to figure out who launched an attack because people are very good and sophisticated at being able to hide that. They don't ever launch an attack from their own home country, from a system in their home country. They go to somewhere else and they do it there. They don't use tools that have already been burned and linked to them. So they use tools that some other countries already burned, so that it gets blamed on that country.
And believe it or not, we have basically given a lot of those tools that the CIA and other inside the United States government people have developed. We have actually given whole tool sets to the international community. We really have. And I know that sounds insane, but there's evidence of that being done. And that's part of the problem. We've given them basically a base tool set to work from.
Yeah. The last sector or area, I guess, of our national critical infrastructure that I want to mention is election systems. Cyber attacks on election systems, can disrupt voting processes. Even if they can't, change the vote, they can still prevent you from being able to vote, because you have what they call distributed denial of service attacks, which can be done against anything connected to the internet. And I don't care what anybody says, that they'll say that our election systems are not connected to the internet, but that is just not true. They may be isolated, they may be using VPNs and things like that, or using trusted networks. But the fact is that they are connected, because that's how the vote tallies can go up, to the Central Election Board. And the other thing is that
otherwise, let's be clear. Otherwise, they'd have to print out a packet locally. They'd have to manually transmit that packet with a armored car, like they do money to the between Federal Reserve banks. Okay, you don't see that happening after these elections, and so how are they sending the data? And you got to ask them that question: are you printing out the data and manually guarding it to the location for merging the counts together, or are you how are you doing it? And they're going to be forced to admit, if you push hard enough, they transfer it electronically.
That's
right. What they'll try to say is, well, it's not connected, but later we are able to then put it on the internet and send it. And my response is, great. Let's cover the details of how that happens.
That's right. Also, one part of the election system that nobody seems to want to admit is part of the election system, when you start talking about things connected to the internet, is the voter rolls. In almost every state, the voter registration is electronic, and it is connected to the internet 100%. You also have the poll books connected to the internet. And if you can alter the voter rolls, then you can set up a scenario by which you can introduce counterfeit ballots through what they call good old-fashioned ballot stuffing. And you would have no way.
Except this is digital cyber ballot stuffing.
That's right. And you would have no way, even in a recount, of identifying that those were fake votes. And that is a real
part of the way they, even though the votes are connected to a name, they break that on purpose digitally. And that's why they say, oh, well, listen, this isn't connected to the internet because they're not connected to this and that. They're intentionally, after they stuff the systems digitally, they're intentionally breaking that connection, so then they can claim it's not connected.
Yeah,
that's being done on purpose after the fact.
That's right. And and when you think about it, a lot of these systems, and this has been exposed, but a lot of these systems have modems. And so why do they even have modems? Well, because how do you get a security update? Are you going to tell me that they send a technician out to every single one of these sites in every single county of every single state? Well,
and half the machines most of the year round, when they're not voting, are taken down. What are you going to do, though? Go into the warehouse, get them all out, boot them all up? Come on.
That's right. So there are plenty of threats against our election systems as well. And our election systems were made part of national critical infrastructure by Jay Johnson, who was the outgoing director of Homeland Security under Obama. That was one of his final actions. I actually agreed with him on that. I do think that it should be considered national critical infrastructure. So,
well, and you bring up an interesting point. I don't know, with all that you've covered, Nate, I don't know what is not affected by the cyber world today in our lives. Can you think of a thing that's not affected in some way or another? I can't. I really can't.
Yep. When you think about just electricity, I live out in the country, and I have a propane tank for like my stove and certain appliances in my house.
Water heater, sure.
Yeah, but I still use electricity to get water out of the ground. I have a well, but if I lose power, how am I going to get water out of the ground?
You either don't have a pump or you got to pump it manually. So you got to pump hard while your wife takes a shower.
Yeah, but I don't even have a manual pump. So what would I do?
Yeah.
I mean, these are things that I don't think
you can't get it done then.
Yeah, people don't think about these things. So, folks, I've got to cut to a commercial break to give a word to our sponsors. But when we get back, we've given you kind of the doomsday scenario of the issues that are going on. But I don't want to leave people fearful. The fact is there are some things that we can do, and there's reasons why I'm bringing these things up and why we're talking about these things, because we need to be prepared, and we need to realize that this is a legitimate, real thing, that it's not a matter of if it's going to happen, it's a matter of when. And so if we can prepare even a little bit so that in those types of scenarios that we can survive, that's a good thing, and it will give us some peace of mind, I think. So we will be right back after a very short break, but stay tuned, and as soon as we get back, we're going to get into some of those some of our responses that should be to these things.
Born in the coastal plains of South Texas, Smoking Gun Coffee is founded by combat veterans that know exactly what a cup of coffee needs to taste like. Run by father and son, each coffee bean is perfected, roasted at 500 degrees, and cooled with a Gulf Coast breeze. Smoking Gun Coffee hand makes and bags each ounce of coffee for maximum customer satisfaction. With every purchase, 10% goes back to organizations that help veterans and local communities. That's Texas made, one bag at a time. To find out more, go to www.smokingguncoffee.com.
Welcome back to the Raising Cane Show. I'm here with my guest, Sam Bushman, and we're talking about cybersecurity threats against our national critical infrastructure. The first half of the show, we really got into a lot of detail of the different sectors that are under threat and that that really are, I think, are in danger of having a major shutdown, or having a cyber attack done against them. So, Sam, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, a lot of people hear these kinds of things, especially those that don't have a background in cybersecurity, and they're afraid, they're nervous. What would you tell the average person, that hears these things? I mean, and I know that just how serious these issues are, but what can people do?
I would start out by letting people know a couple of things. Number one, remember, even if you are a biblical Christian and you believe the earth is 6,000 years old, I know the scientists say it's much older and all that kind of stuff. But since Adam, we know, hey, electricity has been a pretty modern development. Most folks in the world lived without electricity, lived without modern plumbing, lived without running water. Now, I'm not saying that you want to go back to that scenario. However, I would say it's important to kind of practice some of those things. Learn a little bit about what you could do. For example, in your scenario, if you have a well, hey, you can put a hand pump on that well. It's not fun to pump water, but in an emergency, it could be done. That's a simple little thing that you could save a little bit of money for and work on and do. And I don't mean to pick on you. I'm just giving a great example that we just talked about. But remember, people have lived very simple lives for a long time. If you go back to the days of Thoreau, he went out and lived in a cabin with virtually nothing. And he learned so much by doing it. And I think we can have practice weekends where we live without electricity for a little bit. We live without running water for a little bit. We learn to deal with an outhouse or a pit toilet or some of these kind of things. And we learn. And I think practice is important, and realizing that, people lived this way before. And then to think about God for a minute and say, you know what? He knows who you are. Mm-hmm. You're his child. And he will care for you, and he will provide ways. And so the only reason I bring all that up is to focus on this idea of let's not panic first, folks. And then let's separate what we can control and what we can't. Okay. Take the national grid. I can't control what happens with that grid. Okay. But I can control what I do at my home. And I might do something as simple as get myself a Goal Zero or get myself a Jackery or something like that. What is that? It's a backup battery to where I can charge up my cell phone if I need to. And it won't solve things for years or months or years, but it will solve things in quick, brownouts and blackouts. And so there's little things that you can do to make your life better. You can install fans, and I don't have air conditioning, but I can open these windows, and I've learned because I practiced this. You know what? I can blow air through my home and cool it down quite a bit. So people, grandma's not going to die of a heat stroke. She might be hot, but if you give her a bunch of water and blow this air, it's going to be okay. And so you can mitigate. You can not panic. You can trust in God. You can realize that many people before you have lived this simpler way. You can practice it so that you're not surprised. And then you can just take a little bit at a time of what you can control. I can't control, again, the whole grid, but I can encourage my congressman to say, you got to take this seriously. And if you don't know what to do, you know what? Admit it to me. I'm not here to make you look like an idiot. I'm here to say, let's get people around you who do know. And I think if we have a national awareness education campaign, which is what you're doing here tonight, Nate, and I think it's incredible. I love it. We can elevate the discussions. And the more we elevate these discussions and provide solutions and people who know the solutions, the greater chance something gets done. And so you might not be able to directly affect the national grid, but you can indirectly affect it for sure. And it's the kind of thing where we can work on things one little teeny bit at a time. We don't have to solve all the problems. For example, have a little bit of cash in your home, somewhere safe, stashed, where it can't be discovered or stolen. But then, you know what? If the bank goes down, and like Nate's earlier segment, you know what? You've got a little rainy day fund that you can deal with. There's so many little things that you could do that can mitigate. And that's what I really want people to think about is mitigation right now. You might not be able to solve the whole problem. You might not be able to solve it for years or decades, but you can certainly mitigate how bad it will affect your family. And with practice and experience and a little bit of effort, a little bit here, a little bit there, before you know it, it isn't as bad as you think it is. And I would start there, Nate.
I agree with you. I think you nailed it on the head. As a believer myself, I spend an awful lot of time in prayer, and that gives me peace because I realize and recognize a long time ago that life is about, controlling the things that you can control, but most of the things in life that can really affect you, you have no control over. And so it helps to have God to turn to and to seek for help. And I guarantee you, I've seen the miraculous happen in my own life. And I've seen, if it wasn't for my faith in God, there's no way I could have gotten through half the things I've gotten through as a whistleblower, let alone just life in general. But I will tell you, Sam is right on the money. A little bit of preparation goes a long way in giving you peace of mind, and training. I'll give you one example of that. Half the battle in a crisis situation is keeping cool and keeping your head on straight and not losing it, not panicking. When people panic, that's when they make terrible mistakes that end up, costing them their lives. I'll give you an example. Years ago, I was on a hiking trip, and this was like a group from our church that I was probably in my 20s at the time. And we were doing this backpacking trip up into the San Gabriel Mountains, and we were way outside of cell phone signal. This is probably even before I think cellular phones were frequent and cheap. But we were up in the mountains, and one of the gals that was with us, she started having an asthma attack, and she basically couldn't breathe. Her throat was closing up, and a couple of the folks that were with her started panicking and freaking out and were crying and really not being helpful or useful at all. And something kicked in with me, and I think part of it was my training in the Army. But I just immediately went to her backpack and I started rummaging through it to see if there was an inhaler or an EpiPen or something like that, because she was somebody that clearly had a problem with asthma, and it something triggered it. So sure enough, I found an EpiPen and I injected her with it. And all of a sudden, she came back, she could breathe again, and we were good. But, if I hadn't have stayed calm, I wouldn't have thought to do that, and she might have died. And so those are the reasons, that's one reason why it's important that you have some level of training, that you have some kind of idea or plan, generally speaking, of what you would do in these types of scenarios.
Another example that I would give is your car. A lot of people have plenty of things in their car. They got a pack of gum, they got some mints, they make sure they've got their music, they make sure they've got, but have water in your car. You know what? You'll be surprised at when there's an emergency how often you will need water. So have some water in your car. And you know what? Drink it and refresh it, so you don't just have gross old water in your car. But do that. Have a first aid kit in your car. Have some jumper cables in your car. You don't have to pack it with crazy stuff, but there's these thin survival blankets that you can put in your car and use. And you'll be surprised how often that stuff can be used and how valuable it is. A little preparation goes a long way. And I'll give you a simple example. A lot of people run their cars from half full to empty, half full to empty, half full to empty. If you run your car from full to half full, full to half full, it's not really any difference in money except for that one half tank difference. But if you run it from full to half full, you're never out of gas. If there's ever an emergency and you got to go somewhere, you can go. If you're half full to empty, you probably can't go. It's a teeny thing, but it matters a whole lot when the time's needed, right? And it's a simple thing. And it just takes practice to, you know what, when my car's half full, I fill it up. It's that simple. And it's a simple thing, but it's something that really can make a difference. Little things like that, I find, make the most difference. Tiny things. You know, a lot of times people are like, you know what, I'm just not a preparedness expert. I'm not a medical professional. I'm not a IT guy, or I'm not a this or that. You don't need to be. Most of the solutions are the simple things that you just learn and make a way of life.
You know, I like what you said about, you know, you mentioned about earlier about how it's important to understand and learn the old ways of doing things. That is probably one of the most important things, folks, that you can do. In what we're talking about here is really apocalyptic to a certain degree. When I was with the FBI, I had these reports that would come in on every Friday, and it would kind of give these scenarios of different things that could go down, and you know what would happen, how many people would die in the first 2 weeks, and so on and so forth. The worst of all of the things was an EMP, because it would take out power, and without power, it pretty much shuts down everything.
And not only would it take out the power, it would destroy all the devices that need power. So even if you got the power back on, it wouldn't help. I mean, it would help if somebody was hardened and had like a Faraday cage or something. But most devices would be destroyed too.
Yes. I'm laughing because I got a comment in here. Oh, Nate, I got a haircut. Yeah, something else too. You think about that, right? All these things in life that we take for granted, all these simple little pleasures, they go away. But I'll tell you, one of the things that really kind of came to me, I found a book years ago that was a book that my grandfather had, and it was on herbal medicine. And it was a book that was written in 1941, before Big Pharma had taken over and you had pharmacies with drugs that are synthetic. There was only herbal medications before that. There were no synthetic drugs, prior to, to the basically the, I think it was World War I was when they started developing, synthetic drugs. And I will tell you, the thing that I learned was I learned to identify the things right around my house. So I've there's an app that I've used on my phone called Picture It. You can download it and use it now while you still have internet and you still got electricity. But I've cataloged every single weed that grows in my lawn and every single plant that grows on my 9 acres of property.
You snap a shot of it and it tells you what it is,
and it tells me what it is,
not, and everything else, right?
Yep. And then I've gone and I've done some research to find out. You can go to scholar.google.com and you can identify if there's any research studies about whether or not these plants have medicinal purposes or medicinal properties to them. And I've identified every single plant that I could utilize to replace what medications that I currently have. Would it be a little more work? Yes. But I know what I can, what I can take. I know what my parents who live with us,
and you're going to find the herbs are actually more effective if used properly than even the drugs are most times.
Right.
Not always, but most of the times.
Like you mentioned, one of the things on my bucket list of things that I need to get done is, getting a hand pump connected to my electric well so that if I lose power, I can still get water. But I also have the river not too far from me, and it would be a pain. I'd have to go down there and carry buckets home and boil it, but I still do have access to water.
And this is the kind of stuff that I was mentioning when I said practice, practice, practice. I'm going to tell you a little story that you might find fun. So I practice this stuff. I don't just tell people to do this. I actually do this myself, me and my family and a lot of my buddies and things like that. And for the Labor Day weekend, we ate our own homemade sausage that we made. And so this buddy of mine raised these pigs, and anyway, we eventually got made sausage from these pigs and had our own homemade sausage. It was delicious. Anyway, the reason I'm telling you this is because we use a tractor to hang the pig up to do the work to get it ready to, eat, right? But the problem is we realized, hey, well, what happens if you don't have fuel and you don't have your tractor? And so now we're working on, pounding some poles into the ground and developing a pulley system so that we can pull the next pig up and not need the tractor. Okay, well, how do you know that unless you've done it and go, this thing's too big, this thing's 300 pounds or whatever it is, and we need to. But this is what I mean by practice makes perfect, and experience. There's nothing that compensates for experience. You've got to be willing to work and do some of these things, or you just don't know.
That's
For example, you can have 1,500 pounds of wheat in your basement, but if you don't know what to do to make wheat berries, don't know how to grind up your wheat, don't have a hand grinder or whatever the things that it takes. Hey, you're gonna just chew on wheat kernels, I guess. I mean, it'll turn into some gum, but you won't get much of it down your gullet, right? Okay, so you got to practice this stuff, and there's no other way, Nate. There just isn't.
No, you're right. When you think about things like, my job, like I said, 27 years in cybersecurity. If there was an EMP, I'd be out of a job. So
well, my son mentioned that he's an analytics expert for a living, and he's just like, man, what would I do if all of a sudden the world, I would have no practical usable skills. And so that's why some of us are working on this stuff. So
that's
that we
right.
do.
So this is where you guys need to be thinking about, if what do you have to offer your community, right? To make you valuable to them in the event of somewhere where, where everything changes and you have to all of a sudden, start to take care of yourself without all the conveniences of electricity and computers and everything else. Do you have a skill that could be useful in your community? So I've worked on some of the things for me has been to identify, learning how to make medicine, learning how to identify, herbs. It's a hobby, but I have enough knowledge of it that I know more than most of my neighbors do. And so if something went down, I would probably become, the local witch doctor in my neighborhood.
You'd be the medicine man, my friend.
I would. And that's, and to me, that is something that I think is a valuable, that's valuable knowledge to have. For some people, it might be learning how to do carpentry with, hand tools, right? For others, it may be, maybe they're good at growing food. That's another thing that I've learned to do is I've learned a lot about treating disease in plants and things like that, and growing gardens and learning how to capitalize off of, getting high yield foods and things like that will produce a lot.
By the way, there's a couple of books I want to point you to, since you mentioned the books that people can utilize too. There's a book that I've got 8 children and I've got 9 grandchildren to date. So, I deal with kids a lot. So my wife and I discovered a book early on in our child raising experience. It's called How to Raise a Healthy Child in Spite of Your Doctor. And Dr. Mendelsohn wrote the book years and years ago, but I'm telling you right now, it is a how-to guide to do all kinds of things that you would think would make sense or that you wouldn't know how to do yourself. Is how to raise a healthy child in spite of your doctor. And I'm telling you, it really has some incredible guidance in it that is just really valuable. There's also a guy by the name of Caleb Warnock. Caleb lives in Utah. If you look his name up on the internet, I don't have it in front of me, but he's a dear friend of mine. And he is the natural heirlooms seeds master. And he literally has some incredible books that he's written on gardening that are super helpful in all kinds of environments. You can garden in the freezing cold. You can do all these kind of different things. And he's an expert at it. I'm telling you, the guy's a green thumb like you wouldn't believe. And anyway, his name is Caleb Warnock, and he's got heirloom seeds that he really works through, and a lot of these books that are very helpful. Anyway, that's just some practical pointers to some solutions. This is what I mean by surround yourself with people that can point you to solutions. And you feel like this is overwhelming, you feel like this is too much, you feel like I can't do it, but it's the kind of thing where at first you don't know what to do and it's overwhelming. But if you just go at it a little slice at a time, before you know it, you've got more of it than you think you do. And I'll give you an example to make the point. When you're a little kid and you first learn to drive and dad has a stick shift car, you're like, man, I can never get this thing. How do I let out the clutch and put on the gas? And when I need the brake, do the brake and shift and steer. And well, pretty soon after you get good at it, you can eat a hamburger, do all that, and talk to people at the same time, right? It's kind of like that.
You brought up bringing up some good books and things like that. That brings up a very good point. Most of the books that I read nowadays, I read it, with an e-reader, or, I do it on Audible because I'm driving. I want to listen to my book. But the fact is that in a crisis like that, you're going to need printed material. So it's important to make sure that you have hardbound copies of books or paperbound copies of books that have important information like that. You want a book that identifies, and there's basically a handful of books that I would recommend that everybody needs to have. One, they need a book on field guide to medicine that basically tells you how to deal with everything from a broken bone to illnesses and sicknesses and things like that. You want to have a book on herbal medicine, and you particularly want to make sure and check that book has listed in it herbs that grow in your region. And for that, I would also recommend that you get a book on foraging. And they have books that will tell you what is edible in your region. Those are some books that I would definitely recommend that everybody should have on hand, for an emergency, long-term emergency situation. Another thing to think about is, what would you barter with? If you had a financial breakdown and there was no way that you could, and listen, I know we think that it's hard for us to imagine that would ever happen, because we've lived with such peace in our country for such a long time. But in the event of, a prolonged war or an invasion or something like that, I mean, look at these other countries. All you got to do is look at what's happened in so many places around the world. You need something that you can barter with. And, and cash may work, cash might not work. Gold and silver is a great thing to hedge against, inflation, but gold and silver might not do you any good, in a crisis situation.
If you're hungry, gold and silver won't get it.
That's right.
So
Food,
incredible value in gold and silver. Folks, you need beans, bullets, band-aids.
I was just going to say ammunition.
A little bit of everything, right?
Ammunition. The most common round in ammunition is 9mm for a handgun and .223 for a long rifle. And if you stockpile, you can either make ammunition yourself or you can buy it when it's cheap. They got websites like ammobot.com and things like that, or bulkammo.com, where you can monitor and see when the prices dip, and you can buy bulk, and you can buy 5,000, 10,000 rounds for $500 or whatever, and stockpile it. And then if something happens and you need something to barter with, I guarantee you, if there's a lot of activity going on with roaming gangs and stuff, people are going to want ammo. And if you have that as something you can barter with, you can get pretty much anything you want.
You want a little bit of the right things and several different things. So a little bit of gold, a little bit of silver, a little bit of beans, a little bit of bullets, a little bit of band-aids, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, because that's going to be the key. You need multiple things to barter with, not just one thing. And you've also got to be smart enough to do a little bit of caching and planning where it doesn't all get taken from you.
Yeah, absolutely right in that. So, they're tough. It's a tough subject to talk about, because it means acknowledging that things are not as secure as they may oftentimes seem. The fact is we don't know, what's going to happen in the future. We'd like to think that everything's going to work out, and I think in the long run it will. But there could be scenarios where we have these types of situations. So it behooves all of us to make sure that we are doing what we can, to protect our families, to protect ourselves, and to be good neighbors. And friends, you can't do it on your own. You're going to need friends and help. And so it's important to also keep good relations with your neighbors as best you can.
And I will also say this, and I to those of you who live in big cities, I'm sorry about this, but I'm just going to tell you like it is. Being in a big city is one of the worst spots to be.
That's right. I will tell you, if you live in a big city, I don't have to do this where I live, but if you live in a city, the number one thing that you've got to have is a bug out bag and an exit plan. You need to have a plan for how to get the hell out of the city. I'm telling you, every scenario that I've seen is horrible for those that are in the city. Those of us out in the country, we'll survive. But those in the cities, they're going to have a tough time of it, and you better find a way to get the heck out of there. You better have if you got relatives or friends that live out in the country and they're willing to, talk to them ahead of time and get their, permission that in the, in an emergency situation, they can come out there, but, make sure that you've got something to bring them to and something to offer them, whether that's knowledge or something that, can be used to contribute. The last thing that I want to mention is, all these things that we've talked about. The reason why I went down this road of, after the break, getting into talking about prepping, okay, is because I think what both Sam and I are trying to say, folks, is that neither of us, I think, believe that our country is where it needs to be to stop this from happening. I think we both probably deep down inside know that there's an inevitability and it's just a matter of when it happens. And
when and how widespread are the real questions, right?
Yeah. And so we don't want to create fear. We're not fear mongering. These are real truths about what we know to be.
Yeah. Fear mongering is when you don't provide solutions, Nate.
Yeah. And so we are providing you guys solutions, but these are not easy solutions. You're going to have to make a plan. You're going to have to decide what's important for you in your situation. And it's going to be different depending on where you live, how much money you have, what your ability is to be able to save and those types of things. But we all need to be prepared. And I would just say that in regards to the cybersecurity stuff, there's very little that any of us can do about the big infrastructure problems, other than communicating with our legislators and making sure that they are trying to do something about this. If you don't vote, first off, shame on you. You should vote, because we have an opportunity to be able to speak to these people who represent us. And they may not always listen, but focus on the ones that are at the most local level to you. You may not be able to speak to your congressman, but you can probably speak to your delegate and your state senator. And they have a lot of authority to be able to do a lot of this planning for their state. And so that's one thing that I would definitely recommend on the legislative side of things, is that you talk to your state legislators, you talk to your local sheriff. You find out if they have a plan for a crisis situation. Get involved with local community, food banks and things like that, and see what you can do. Make yourself, like I said, make yourself invaluable to your community. Get with your neighbors and talk to them about these types of scenarios, and ask them if they have a plan, and work on developing plans for your neighborhood.
I also think it's really important, and I know we've kind of touched on this, but we haven't really hammered it home like I think needs to be. There are places that can get you started in this. You don't have to do it all at once. One of them is called Prep Starts Now. It's a website that I run with a buddy of mine, prepstartsnow.com. I'm not just trying to promote my own website. I'm trying to give places where people can get started in this and not feel overwhelmed. But I really want to highlight this spiritual aspect of this. You cannot be super prepper and ignore the spiritual aspect of this. And I'm not talking about the keys to theology or this religion or that religion, or, whether you're a Baptist or a Protestant or a Mormon or a Catholic or whatever. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a relationship with God, realizing there's a higher source of authority who you could turn to, prayer, having relationships of trust with your family members and with God. This spiritual side of things, you'll find that people who don't have that often don't make it, Nate.
That's
people
right.
who do have hope. And that
right.
really is one of the big keys. It's one thing to know all these prep things. It's another, though, to have this attitude of, you know what, someone's got my back. It's God. Or someone's got, and I have hope that, you know what, I can get through this. And that hope comes with that kind of spiritual relationship. So I'm not talking about a specific religion or anything. I'm just telling you that you've got to have that spiritual side of your life intact as well.
That's right. There's a lot of research actually into that, it's the people who have that spiritual resiliency that survive these difficult times. And the likelihood is that we're very likely going to see an incident or two. And it may, we don't know how widespread, we don't know when, but I can guarantee you, you're going to have those situations in life. And you've got to have some level of preparation, and not just be, from a physical standpoint, but from a spiritual one as well. On that note, I always like to end my show with prayer, because I believe wholeheartedly that, and I always say this in the show, and I'll say it again, unless the Lord builds a house, those that labor in vain. Unless the Lord stands guard over the city, those who do so are doing it in vain. We have to recognize that the Lord is our provider. When George Washington and our founders and all these great men that started this country did so, they did it with the understanding of what they called providence, which was the hand of God providing blessing for our nation. They understood that concept. They weren't all, super spiritual heroes, but they had an understanding of that. They didn't have the arrogance to think that it was, that they were going to have success on the basis of their own strength. And I think it's important that we recognize that and that we're in the habit of that. And that's why I always end my show in prayer. But before I do, I want to give the final word to Sam. Sam, is there anything that you think people need to, I guess if there's one thing that you want people to take away from this conversation, what would that be?
I would say this: remember, hope springs eternal. You know what? You've got to have hope in the future of the human race, of God, of his care of his children. And then most importantly, you've got to have this attitude that, you know what? I cannot solve the world's problems by 3:00. But you know what? I can do something today. I can do something to bless my life. I can do something to bless the lives of those around me. And as we serve others and as we prepare a little bit at a time, you know what? It doesn't take a whole lot if you do something every day to it being a whole lot over time. And remember that when it comes to preparedness. You know what? Getting an extra can of soup at the store every time you go. Before you know it, you'll have a bunch of cans of soup. I know that's a simple example, but I'm just telling you, that's how real preparedness happens. That's how those gain ground and gain knowledge. A little bit of knowledge, before you know it, becomes a lot of knowledge. But it just happens one little teeny line at a time, right? And that's how it happens. And so don't give up. Just start and continue. And as you keep at it, before you know it, you'll go, man, you know what? I know quite a bit about this. 2, 3, 4, 5 years later, you go, you know what? I'm getting somewhere. Look at the food storage that I have. And so it happens just a little bit at a time, almost even imperceptible. It's like the strokes of a painting. When you look at the painting really close, you just see the individual strokes and it doesn't make any sense. You step back and it all comes into view. That's how it is with preparedness. That's what I would say,
right.
Nate.
That's right. Heavenly Father, Lord, I thank you for Sam coming on the show today, Lord, and I thank you for the discussion that we've been having here today. Lord, for all those that are watching and that are listening, Lord, I pray that you would draw them unto you. Lord, that you would give us the knowledge that we need, Lord, to be able to deal with any scenarios, not just so that we can survive it, but that we can excel through it and help others. Lord, I pray that you would ultimately prevent this kind of catastrophe, this end of world scenario, Lord, that we're talking about tonight. Lord, we know the inevitability, and we know that that as the time goes on, that we're going to see more and more of these types of scenarios that are going to come to pass. And I pray that you would help us to be prepared. Those watching the show would take something away from this conversation, not to be afraid, but to be prepared and to realize the seriousness of what we talked about tonight. And Lord, I pray that you would bless our country, that you would help us to have righteous leaders, that you would help us to elect good leaders, Lord, that would think about these things and do something and take the right actions to prepare, and to create a scenario, Lord, that that helps us all to be able to get through, these situations. We pray your blessing over tonight and over everyone listening, and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, sir. Wonderful show. Grateful to be with you.
Thank you. You too. And until next time, folks, remember, stay vigilant and stay hopeful. God bless.
Raise some cane. You gotta raise some cane. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some cane, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel Feel the power, be the change. The time is now. We gotta raise some cane.